Thanksgiving night was supposed to feel warm and honest, the kind of evening where buttery light glossed over old aches and the smell of cinnamon made even strained families sound like laughter. I carved the turkey because I always carved the turkey, and my father kept everyone's glasses full because he always pretended generosity tasted like wine. Dishes clattered, football murmured from the living room, and somewhere under it all a quietness pressed against my ribs, a sense that something rehearsed was about to happen. When my phone buzzed, I didn't look right away. I wanted a few more minutes of pretending we were the kind of people our holiday cards suggested. Then the alert opened like a trapdoor. Your balance is 7 cents. Before we continue, be part of our growing family by hitting that subscribe button. And here's something fun. Share your name and tell us where you're tuning in from in the comments. We might feature you with a shout out in our next video, because your support truly means the world to us. Now, let's proceed. The numbers were so small they felt mocking, a fraction of a coin presented like a punchline, and as I refreshed each account, every room in my financial house turned out the lights. Checking, 7 cents. Savings, 0. Emergency fund, 0. Business account. The one I had resuscitated more times than I could count, drained. Sub-accounts for payroll and taxes, emptied clean, as if a careful hand had wiped counters and folded the cloth. When I looked up, my mother held a smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes, and my father wore a smirk I recognized from every ruthless deal he'd ever closed. He tapped his glass with a fork and announced a toast to family, but never once looked away from me. I asked the question anyway, soft enough to keep our cousins out of it. Did he move my money? He took a slow sip and said, almost bored, we needed it more than you do. My mother patted his wrist and added, everything we have stays in the family. I didn't throw the phone. I set it face down and said, calm as the underside of ice, I hope you need this too. I collected plates for something to do with my hands. In the kitchen, steam fogged the window and made the dark outside look like a chalk sketch. My mother followed, voice pitched for mercy, and spun a familiar story about my father worrying, carrying everything, doing what had to be done. I turned off the water and let the hiss die. He didn't carry this, I said. He took it. Her mouth opened and closed, searching for language that would make theft sound like love. It's for us, she tried. We did it for you. That was the moment I understood I had trained them to believe that my loyalty was consent. I dried my hands, walked back to the dining room, and found my father lounging with the posture of a man who believed the kingdom he surveyed would always be his. You'll thank me later, he said. No, I told him, sliding on my coat. This is family. The smirk flickered. Then I left. In the car, the heater coughed awake and the windshield drew slow, clear arcs. My phone glowed with the insult of 7 honest cents. I opened my notes and wrote like a medic triaging a scene. Change the locks. Call the bank. Freeze authorizations. Check corporate access. Lawyer at 9. Accountant at 10. Pull contract box. Call Lena. The moment I typed Lena's name, the memory clicked. The clause she'd insisted on in our banking agreement. Unilateral withdrawals by non-primary signatories counted as misuse subject to immediate reversal and investigation. I heard my father snort in my head, calling it paranoid legal fluff. I had kept it anyway, because I had learned to trust the people who read the fine print. I drove home through a clean, black November night, and felt anger harden into the kind of focus you only get when pain points to a map. By sunrise I was dressed, steady, and waiting for bank security on speaker. I asked for a freeze on every account and an audit trail of IP addresses and timestamps. They complied with the brisk efficiency of people who understood that numbers had been wronged. The compliance officer used phrases like irregular activity and exceeding authorization limits, and promised a formal investigation with a provisional reversal. My lawyer picked up on the second ring, sleep still on his voice, and came fully awake before I finished the story. He asked for scans of the signature cards and the bookmarked clause. I sent them with the subject line Thanksgiving because I wanted the season etched into the record. He told me what would happen next. The letters, the subpoenas, the careful choreography of undoing what had been done, and none of it sounded like revenge. It sounded like repair. The accountant arrived with coffee and a yellow legal pad and the quiet, unshowy competence that has saved more lives than speeches. We mashed withdrawals against authorizations, traced every transfer, and found not just the big siphon but a series of older trickles. Small sweeps out of the business account timed to months when I had covered supplier checks from my personal savings. The pattern wasn't a mistake, it was a habit. I authorized a forensic review, not because I wanted to humiliate them, but because sunlight was the only antiseptic I could trust. Then I drove to the shop. My shop, though I had let the pronouns slip, to secure the petty cash, inventory counts, and server backups. I changed passwords, removed delegations, and updated the alarm codes to numbers my hands had known for years, but my parents had never bothered to learn. Bored kings don't memorize keys. They assume the doors will open. That afternoon, I held a staff meeting and told the truth without 1 ounce of theater. We would meet payroll. Vendor relationships were intact. The company would move to a clean LLC structure under a trust administered by a third-party fiduciary, so no single person, not even me, could play emperor again. I promised process and posted it, then followed it to the letter, because trust wasn't something I could demand anymore. It was something I had to hold out in both hands and let people test. The vendors who had been with us through lean winters got personal calls. The one supplier my father habitually stiffed received a wire and a written apology. I drew a hard boundary around gossip, not because I was protecting my parents, but because I was protecting the people who worked for us from becoming characters in our family spectacle. The first call from my father arrived as the bank's reversal notices did. His voice thin, dignity scraped raw. He moved through the stations fast, bluster, bargaining, then a hot, panicked grievance about betrayal that would have been funny if it weren't so precise. "You don't want to destroy your own family," he said, making destruction sound like a door I had opened. "Family doesn't drain a son's life and smirk," I answered. He told me I had always landed on my feet. I told him I had learned how because he had preferred falling to walking. He asked for a meeting. I told him to route everything through counsel. That word, counsel, was a wall he had never been required to climb, because for years I had sprinkled cushions wherever he crashed. He hung up on the advice of his pride. Pride has never won an appeal. While letters moved like chess pieces between attorneys, my mother tried a softer front. Texts filled with old photographs and the punctuation of someone who believes tears can edit facts. "We're still us. Your father is old-fashioned. We did it for you." I didn't block her. I archived everything. Quiet doesn't mean soft. It means choosing when to speak and documenting the rest. The bank returned funds in stages. The forensic report bloomed with neat exhibits, and the accountant's binder took on the weight of something that could stop a door or a man. I slept. Not well at first, then deeply, like my bones understood that while the war wasn't over, the rules had changed in a way I could live with. 2 weeks in, a call came from a law office I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end belonged to a trustee I had met once as a boy at a funeral, a man whose gentleness had seemed out of place among the suits. He told me he was executing the final instruction of my grandfather's estate, a letter held until a condition of demonstrated independence was met. Apparently, a bank investigation paired with corporate restructuring and counsel retention qualified. I went to his office expecting an old man's sentimentality and left with a photocopy of my grandfather's handwriting and a schedule of assets my father had never mentioned, a small commercial building, a portfolio of municipal bonds, and a trust clause that named me, not my father, as beneficiary upon evidence that I would protect, not plunder. My grandfather had not been old-fashioned. He had been careful. I hired a probate attorney to gently pry at the seams my father had stapled over. She found a pattern of temporary borrowings my father had taken from the trust years ago, always recorded as notes, never repaid. It wasn't enough to put him in handcuffs, but it was enough to take the keys out of his hand. We negotiated, not with threats or spectacle, but with documents and deadlines. In exchange for reversing the last of the withdrawals and resigning from any role at the shop, my parents avoided a civil suit that would have drained them of more than money. They signed. It turns out even loud men can read when the letters spell no. There were people who wanted a scene, an office showdown, a holiday brawl, a video that would turn pain into clicks. I gave them a ledger instead. Reputation, the currency my father cared most about, dimmed in the only circles that mattered to him. The bankers who stopped calling him sir, the vendors who stopped tolerating next week, the neighbors who stopped confusing volume for generosity. He sold the boat that had taught him to wear shoes without socks. They put the lake house on the market. My mother stopped hosting charity brunches because the air in those rooms felt suddenly honest. None of that pleased me. What pleased me was payroll clearing on time, a new apprentice laughing in the break room, and the sound of my own front door locking at night with a click that meant mine. We met once, my parents and I, at the shop after closing, because there is a difference between a boundary and a grudge. The lights were too bright, as retail lights always are after hours, and the floor smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. My father stood beside the counter where he'd taught me to count change, and for a second I saw him as he had been, taller than the world, capable of anything, not yet practiced at confusion. I laid out the terms he had already signed and added the one that mattered to me. No more pretending. If they wanted to see me, they would do it as people who had done harm and were learning how not to. My mother nodded through tears that may have been grief or performance. It wasn't my job to score them. My father opened his mouth twice, then closed it both times. I left before he found a speech. There was a final twist I didn't announce, not because it was secret, but because it was mine. Months before Thanksgiving, I had begun to suspect a storm, not because of any single dark cloud, but because weather has a smell if you pay attention. On Lena's advice, I had created a separate structure, a foundation with teeth and rules to hold the parts of our business that made us proud. An employee emergency fund, scholarships for vocational students, a grant program for small suppliers trying to grow without bending to predatory terms. I had seeded it with quiet profits from a side contract my father never understood and never bothered to ask about. After the reversals settled, I moved a portion of returned funds there with board oversight that included 2 employees and a vendor, none of whom shared my last name. That money would not buy a boat. It would buy futures. Mine, too. I kept the folder named Thanksgiving on my desk for a while, not as a shrine to injury, but as a record of repair. Inside were copies of the clause my father had laughed at, the reversal notices, the trustee's letter in my grandfather's hand, and a single sheet of paper where I had drawn a circle around 7 since the night everything cracked. Around that circle I had written words like locks, counsel, audit, and trust. In smaller letters, at the very edge, I had written mercy, not because I owed them any, but because I owed it to the version of me who had been taught to carry things. Mercy didn't look like forgetting. It looked like not letting bitterness write my next chapter. On the first snow of December, I walked past the shop windows and watched our new apprentice teach a kid how to sand an edge without tearing the grain. Inside, the music was too loud and the laughter too easy for work, which meant the work would last. My father's name was no longer on the door, and mine wasn't either. The company's name stood alone, as if the building itself had grown tired of surnames. I stood on the sidewalk a long time, hat pulled low, breath hanging like a small cloud, and thought about the sentence I had thrown like a pebble into a deep well. I hope you need this too. I had meant the money. What they needed, what I needed, was smaller and harder. A limit, a law, a quiet, sturdy life where love did not wear the mask of taking. Sometimes I still hear the clink of the fork against the wine glass, the smugness that sounded like a door closing, and my stomach pulls tight before it lets go. Then I unlock my own door. In a home where every bill is paid and no one keeps a ledger of affection, and I put my keys in the dish by the plant my mother never could keep alive, but I can. The phone buzzes sometimes with mundane alerts, deposits, drafts, a fraud check that now triggers on pennies rather than thousands, and I smile at them like dull weather. If I ever see 7 cents again, it will be because I bought a candy I didn't need and told the cashier to keep the change. That night is not a wound anymore. It's a map folded in my pocket, creased where it taught me to turn. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Your support means the world to us.